My mother continued to argue and was determined not to go on this trip. And I began to see that it would be a lost cause as well. I, I had a very bad feeling about the planned trip. I'm trying the pumpkin spice latte from Tim Hortons, and I absolutely love pumpkin spice. It's one of my favorite flavors of coffee. This has to be one of the best pumpkin spice lattes I've ever had. And what I love about it is that it's full of flavor, but it's not sugary. It's not drenched in sugar and that icky sweetness. So, yeah, that's how I like things to taste. Mm. So, in the next part of this story, guys, I recall my late mother an awful lot. She figures prominently in this story, although uh, her part in it is still very confusing to me. I can't begin to imagine what she must have been going through after being with my dad for over 4 decades, and you know he collapsed like that. We were in a turmoil. Many people remember my mother best for her incredible sketches. Most people remember my mother's work best as still life, but I especially adored her portraits. This is the one that my mother painted and hung in our condo. But when my condo got looted about 5 years ago, the painting went along with all the other things. She did an amazing sketch of the Kennedy brothers back when we were living at our old house. And when we sold the house, the people who purchased it bought it on condition that they would let my mother would let them have that portrait, and it was an incredible portrait. The one where the two Kennedy brothers are side by side, one facing and one in a profile, and a very contemplative expression. It was amazing. I could not tell the difference between the real painting and my mom's sketch. It was incredibly lifelike. My mom especially loved copying the great paintings of Michelangelo and Raphael Santi. To continue with the story, it was a very difficult time for my mom, especially, and I tried to be very sensitive to what she was going through. And by the same token, I wanted her to be sensitive to what I was going through as well. We were going through something that we didn't know how to get through. And I have to admit, it was the first really tragic incident that we had experienced in over 2 or 3 decades. So it was kind of mind-boggling for me at the time. I felt like a completely different person. I didn't know how to react or respond to any of the changes that I was going through. In the days following my dad's funeral, I remember that his business partner came over one day while we were out. I believe that my mom and I were out doing some grocery shopping. And he called us later on to tell us that he had picked up my dad's sports car. And we didn't understand why exactly he did that. This would have been the first of several incidents that took place without our knowledge or understanding. And there was a clause in my dad's will that specifically stated that the liquidation of various assets would only be reserved for conditions of bankruptcy. Well, the financial conditions were far from bankrupt. But my dad's business partner proceeded anyway. Also, following the days of my dad's passing and funeral, without our consent or knowledge, he went ahead and booked my mom and I a trip to the Dominican Republic. And guys, I don't like the Caribbean. I dislike places that are very overly tropical and surrounded by jungle. I'm claustrophobic about jungle, and so I wasn't going to be comfortable in a place like that. And my mom had the understanding that I had discussed it with him beforehand and let him know that it would be okay to go ahead and book us. Well, I would never have done such a thing, especially in my mother's case. She disliked travel. And I think because my father had been so close to travel and so much of a travel person, it hurt her. It hurt her to face that situation again without my dad. And I kind of felt the same way. Though I was an avid traveler and I loved the distraction that a new country and place could bring, and I would have welcomed it had it been under different circumstances. It so happened that the resort that he went ahead and booked us for was the same resort that one of my best girlfriends and her new husband had traveled to just a few months earlier, or maybe a year or two earlier. So I went ahead and I called her up and I asked her about the resort. And she said, "You're going to love it because it's very luxurious. It's all inclusive. And you can't really do too much out of the resort, but it's perfect for, just passing the time and trying to relax and have a peaceful outlook on life. So you can get a new outlook on life that can bring you some calmness and tranquility." And so when I heard that, I thought, okay, well, maybe this won't be too bad after all. It happens that every time I have traveled to the Caribbean, maybe 2 or 3 times previous to this, there was always some sort of cyclone or tornado. Our own home abroad had earthquakes every day around 3 p.m. That was nothing compared to the horrible weather that I used to experience every time I went to the Caribbean. And so that is another reason why I dislike going there. And, I don't mind lizards, but I don't like bugs and things crawling around in the hotel and in the rooms. And basically, when you're in the Caribbean, you tend to see a lot of that, don't you? I don't like that. My mother continued to argue and was determined not to go on this trip. And I began to see that it would be a lost cause as well. I had a very bad feeling about the planned trip. Regardless, my dad's business partner assured my mom that it would pass very quickly and that she would be refreshed. And in a much calmer state of mind when she returned. And I think my mother realized that he could actually be right, and she didn't want to start off on a bad footing with my dad's business partner because he was, after all, the executor. But deep down, she was fighting tears all the time. She was very nervous, and she would explode into mini fits of rage when we were packing, or whenever I asked her a question about the trip or what she was going to pack. She would explode at me. I understood what she was going through, and I kind of was going through the same thing myself. I really didn't want to face a new and different place. I preferred to go to our old home abroad. And so, however, presently, later on, I would come to realize why my dad's business partner basically forbade us to go down to our own condo on the beach. He actually went down there himself while we were in the Dominican Republic, and he made himself busy telling the condo administration there that he was the new owner of our beach house, and nothing could have been further from the truth. Nerve of him! And so, anyway, I'm getting ahead of the story a little. Before my mother and I actually set foot abroad, we were not looking forward to our first trip out of the country without my dad. And one evening, as my mother and I were packing and discussing how we would get through this next trip without my dad, my best girlfriend, who had been at the funeral, called me up and asked me if it would be okay for her to come along because she was very familiar with the resort as well, and she thought that maybe she could be, distract my mother and I, and maybe show us around a little, take us to the best restaurants that she knew of, and, have some company there. And I was so relieved when she offered to do that. I thought, well, I'd already been away to my beach house with her, and she was a load of fun, guys. She was so much fun. I'm sorry that she's not around anymore, because I think that we would have continued to have good times as we got older. But she actually passed away a couple of years after my father passed away, and it was self-inflicted. And that's all I'm going to say on it. It devastated me. Anyway, I told my mother what she had suggested, and my mother said, gee, I don't know. She might be, just looking to have a good time, and my head is not in it. And I said to her, now, she understands, because she's been through these things as well, and she understands what we need. I try not to worry about that part too much. And so, the next thing I know, maybe the day after or so, my dad's business partner calls us, and he said, under no circumstances is she to travel with you. You're going there to relax. And I said, well, actually, I am relaxed, but I would feel better, with a familiar face. And guys, it's going to become very crystal clear why he refused to book her. He refused to book my best girlfriend on the trip. I cannot believe it. My own dad would never have been so domineering and manipulative. Although my father did have some reservations about my best friend, he was all for us being friendly and traveling together and hanging out together. He was not going to tell me what to do. And so therefore, I was not going to let my dad's business partner tell me what to do. But he did. And from that time on, guys, my friend who called me in tears and said that she was forbidden to book on the same trip that we were going on, she could not understand, and neither could I. And from that time on, our friendship kind of went on a downslide, and I think that she probably figured it was actually me who was asking my dad's business partner not to book her. And I never would have done that. I would have told her myself if I had had that sort of feeling about the trip. But I wanted her to come. She never did end up booking, and she never did end up completely forgetting about that incident. And I am very convinced that that situation contributed to her state of troubled mind when she passed away. So, in any case, the morning comes that we are to travel to the Dominican Republic. It was Puerto Plata. I remember the city abbreviation being POP, so that's Puerto Plata. And it was very early in the morning. We were on the plane by 6-ish, 7-ish, and I remember being so tired and my mother in tears, and she struggled and she screamed, and I know what she was going through. She was tired, without sleep, and in a frenzied state of mind. She was afraid to go, and I kind of was afraid to go alone with her. I didn't know what she would do. And she was in a very fragile state of mind and very nervous, very, very uptight, very scared. We touched down in the Dominican Republic, and it was late afternoon, getting to be dusk. And I remember that after we picked our luggage, it was a horrible wait for the luggage to come out. And we headed to the shuttle that was going to take us to the resort. And the tour guide on the bus scared us, absolutely scared us to death, and confirmed all of my misgivings about this particular destination, that it was not a safe place to be. And I felt horrible as we turned and exited the airport and made our way to the resort. I felt that we had absolutely made a horrible decision to let my dad's business partner talk us into this. My dad never would have brought us to that destination because he knew my mom and I. It was luxurious, but it wasn't the sort of resort that actually catered to all the tourists in the same way that we had been accustomed to. And that is probably why my dad's business partner was so insistent that we go there and not to our condo abroad. The guide on the shuttle on the way to the resort warned us all, don't talk to anybody, don't go out with anybody, do not give anybody any money. If you want to book a tour, come to us. Don't walk in the streets alone. If you feel like you want to go out of the resort for a day or for a couple of hours, you can arrange a tour at the hotel desk. Do not venture out on your own. I was terrified. Our first morning there was not refreshing or very welcoming. Let me tell you why. My mother and I went down to breakfast, and it was a beautiful buffet, all you can eat, all inclusive. And I remember distinctly going down with a crop top, you know, those little t-shirts that cut right at mid-waist. And I believe that I had a little sweater over it because it was air conditioned in the hotel and I didn't want to catch another cold. I had on a pair of ripped denim shorts, but I looked fine. I went everywhere at our own home abroad in that same outfit, and I never had a problem anywhere. I looked around inside the buffet room. I could see that there were other women seated at the tables in the same attire that I was wearing. It caught the attention of a real mean hotel employee that was managing, I assume, the breakfast hour meal. And so she came up to our table and she said, "You," pointing at me, "have to go and change. You're not appropriately dressed. Out." Oh, okay. And I actually looked around and I saw that I wasn't the only one wearing a similar sort of outfit. And so I let it go and I went upstairs and I put on a heavy t-shirt because I knew that sometimes at night in the tropics it does get cool and windy. So I put that long sleeve t-shirt on and went back down to try to finish breakfast. Also, on our way down to breakfast, before the incident occurred, my mother and I went to pick out 2 chairs by the pool, one in the shade and one in the sun, kind of close to each other, and we put towels from the hotel and from our own luggage on the chairs, along with extra pairs of flip-flops and bathing suit covers. And I also tied a little string around the right front side of my lounging chair so I would know exactly what chair in case something happened. And I have been used to that happening off and on down at our beach house abroad. And so I was prepared that something would happen. Lo and behold, when my mother and I got back from breakfast and I had gone up to take off my heavy shirt, we found 2 people seated on my lounging chair, and both of our items were scattered all over the pool, inside of a bush. Well, I exploded. Needless to say, those 2 people scattered out of my chair, and after I retrieved all of my thrown about items, and we were so pissed off. And if you guess by now that this was all of this was under the manipulative, evil, conniving control of my dad's business partner, you guessed right. Evil and conniving he was. And his message was loud and clear. Now that your dad is gone, you are not going to be able to do anything that you wanted, just like when he was around, because now you have to answer to me. Why was he wrong? And he was in for a real shock. On our 2nd or 3rd day, the same situation. I believe it was the 3rd or 4th day. The morning buffet came. The time for the morning buffet came. And again, I had a similar situation. This time I was wearing long sleeves. Well, as you know, the beach there is topless. And I, for one, always thought that it was my father's business partner's intent to hurt my mother because there were many honeymooning couples there. And in order for her to feel the absence of my father much more intensely than was very necessary, he booked us for, in a honeymoon resort. And I thought that was very inconsiderate of him. Also very inappropriate, seeing that my mother had always been a very traditional, no-nonsense Italian lady that did not want to see young women cavorting about on the beach topless. And I felt funny about it too. Actually kind of felt like a slap in the face. And so we were really hurting under the control of my dad's business partner. And, you know, this time I was very upset when the woman, the manager, approached us again. I actually snapped back at her and I gave her my camera and I said, you know what, guys, I didn't even take any pictures, but I had a camera with me. And I said, go ahead and photograph all the other women who are here dressed as even more inappropriately than I am. Go ahead, take all the pictures. And then I asked a waiter to call the hotel manager to come into the buffet room and settle a dispute. And when he did arrive, I actually told him that if this woman ever approached me again, I would make sure that none of our tour company, which was actually on the way out, would ever book this resort again. And I would actually try to file a lawsuit against the hotel. Discriminatory treatment. Well, she never bothered me again. It was that same night that my mother and I were getting ready to go out to dinner. We had just spent an entire day at the beach, and the day was semi-cloudy. I have to tell you guys, the weather was horrible. The walls were slimy and damp, and I'm sure there was mildew there. Thank goodness I don't have any allergies to mildew, but I didn't feel comfortable there. And it rained, it poured constantly. And the skies were very gray and wet. And as it is in many of these resorts at that time of year, October, November. And so I had been coping with my music, you know, my headphones, and my Cafe Americana, which I had 2 or 3 of those every afternoon. And I didn't really go for lunch. I didn't, I'm not a lunch person. Usually I'm not. But this time, I never really felt the urge to eat during the day, but that cafe americana really hit the spot. And so that afternoon, we headed upstairs to our room at around 4-ish, 5-ish. And my mother began to lay out clothes to go out to dinner. She had been in the habit of refusing to go to dinner, and I had also been in the habit of going to pick out some snacks at a convenience store and maybe some instant soups because, uh, I think it was against the rule to bring food back into the hotel room, plates and whatever. So I couldn't go to the buffet and come back with plates. I believe that at the time was the rule. And so I told my mother, I said, I'm tired of this instant soup. We're here, we might as well see what these other restaurants are like. It's not like we're enjoying ourselves or going for a party. We have to eat, right? And I don't want to get sick again because I feel like sometimes I'm coming down with that same sniffle and scratchy throat. And so that convinced her to come out to dinner with me. And those restaurants were beautiful, guys. And I know that a lot of these buffets also had ice sculptures and scads of tables filled with every kind of food imaginable. And so it was a nice distraction. Got out of the shower and sat myself down in front of the bathroom mirror as my mother relaxed on the bed and picked out her outfit. She had already taken a shower, and I remember I was doing my hair. And in those days, it was rollers, guys, and curling iron. And my hair would be all poofy and curly, wavy. And I couldn't go anywhere without that look. And so, however, with the ghetto blaster and the headphones, it was awkward for me to do my hair and my makeup. And so at one point, I unplugged the headphones and let the music play. Now, I know it wasn't blasting. It wasn't very loud, but it irritated my mother, and she was right. I should not have had the music on, but I wanted to get through my makeup and my hair without stopping to listen to the music. Music is what got me through everything, and I wasn't dancing, I wasn't singing, I was simply listening. And what happened is that as I put the finishing touches on my face, I don't think I was wearing any foundation, but just some eye makeup and eyeliner and lipstick. I was finishing off the eyeliner. I believe it was this eye. And I was seated away from the mirror, so I did not see my mom coming up behind me. What happened was, just as I was leaning into the mirror to have, a better look at my eye, she screamed in my ear, "What do you think you're doing?" And guys, guess where that pencil ended up going? Got it. Deep inside of my eye. Right in the corner. I was screaming bloody murder. It hurt like the dickens. I understand my mother being upset, but I don't understand her cunning. By her argument, she was under the impression that I had been trying to have a good time and sneaking it in behind her back. Guys, I can assure you, I was not having a good time throughout any of that trip, that horrible nightmare trip. I was merely using music as a way to cope. I know that when my dad was in the hospital, that's all I did. I would bring my little Walkman and listen to it throughout the night. And my father loved that music. And sometimes I would let him hear it too. And basically, that's what we had my dad do as well, listening to all of his favorite tapes at the hospital while he was, trying to relax and cope with the pain. It did remind me an awful lot of my dad and how much he loved music. And so my mother never bothered to think that way. And she was very hurt and offended that I could try to enjoy myself after my father's passing. Well, I wasn't trying that hard to enjoy myself. I was merely struggling to find a way to cope with all the grief that I was so unaccustomed to. So when I turned around to face my mother, she gasped and she saw how injured I was. And although it wasn't actually her fault 100%, she basically caused it. She did a silly thing by sneaking up while I had my hand close to my eye with a pencil stuck near the lid. She realized, how dangerous that entire situation was. And she immediately called the desk and asked for an ambulance. I quickly threw on my shorts and I grabbed my tourist card and my ID, and I believe there was money in there for whatever cash I might have had to pay out. In a few seconds, I was down in the lobby, and my mother refused to come. She refused to come. And, because of the ordeal that we had gone through with my dad, I can imagine how she must have felt going to a hospital with yet another family member. I didn't wait for her to explain. I merely understood, but guys, I was terrified. I had promised myself that I would never set foot in another hospital again for as many years as I could possibly put off. But here I was, a couple of mere weeks later, back in the hospital. The hotel staff pointed to me, and a small, kind of wiry local man with a bit of a mustache came sauntering toward me, and he said, "Take my hand." Okay, I took his hand. Again, like the tour guide in the bus, he said, "You are not to leave my side. You are not to let go of my hand." And I didn't understand what the trouble was. So we got out into the parking area of the hotel, and I saw a huge white transport truck parked right there. It wasn't an ambulance. Way up high, and I said to myself, how the heck am I going to get on that? I was next to nothing. I weighed something like 92 pounds at the time, and he hoisted me up into the passenger seat with absolutely no problem at all. And soon we were on our way to emergency. And on the way, stopped at a red light. He turned around to look at me as I scanned the scenery and the landscape. It was pure jungle, guys. Nothing but jungle all around us. And he said to me, "Don't get any ideas. You stay right here and do not think of leaving." I turned around and I asked him, "What do you mean?" I said, "Where the heck am I going to run to? The jungle? There's nothing here." Soon, however, we were approaching what looked to me to be kind of a small tropical building. When I say tropical, I mean it was partly made with straw. And so the same routine. Hold my hand. You're not going anywhere without me. You go straight where I lead you. Do not look at anybody. Do not talk to anybody. Okay. The whole process was very simple and calm. I showed them my tourist ID, and I think I might have given them a few dollars. I don't know. And they took some x-rays to make sure that my eye wasn't punctured and that muscle behind the lid was all right. And by this time, I was shocked that there was no blood coming out. My eye was pure red. You couldn't see my pupil. You couldn't see the color of my eye, anything. It was horrible. And luckily, I was wearing sunglasses. They prescribed me some drops and sent me on my way. Back to the guy who insisted that I hold his hand, and he hoisted me back up into the truck and drove me back to the hotel. And I believe it was probably right before we got back to the hotel that he stopped off at a pharmacy. He went in, filled the prescription, after threatening me not to leave the truck. And no, I didn't leave the truck. I was too scared. And that actually brings us to the end of our story. My mom and I don't think that we went out to dinner that night, but we did go out the night after. And I think that she was truly sorry, although she never brought it up, she never mentioned it. Many people don't know about this story because she never talked about it. And I kind of forgot about it because it was a frightening experience for me. That is the end of that story. And it really does show that my mother and I were struggling to be alone with each other. We really missed the presence of my father. My father was a jokey, laughing kind of a guy, always happy, always, cheery and sarcastic sometimes. And, I remember that being alone with my mother after he passed away was really, really intimidating for me, because not only didn't I want to accept the fact that my father was truly gone for good, my mother kind of changed, and so did I. We weren't ourselves anymore. And, I guess having that family dynamic, missing that chunk of dynamic, gone from your home for good, from your family for good, it's devastating. Even in the office, my father was always joking. And I know that a couple of people, my father's business partner, and one other woman, they used to make fun of me because every time I tried to print out an itinerary for a customer, a passenger, they would botch it up for me, and it became a joke. And I told my dad once, just watch what they're doing. They're making fun of me. They're making things hard for me. Of course, he turned it into a big joke, and, that's how I remember my dad, being kind of a clownish, happy-go-lucky guy, businessman, who had the world in the palm of his hand at the time. What a time for him to have left Earth. I can't get over that. Thank you so much for listening and watching.